First, want to thank you all for joining us in this conversation, and I wanted to recognize that one of our co-panelists, Johnny O, couldn't be here today, but he was honored to be offered a space to speak and let his voice be heard. But however, he lives in a remote village, and so by the time our panel had gotten rescheduled and we got a confirmed time, it was unfortunately too late for him to get here. But it really makes me think about the privilege that many of us hold in this room to be here, to sit in these seats, to allow ourselves to listen to each other, and to kind of think about that a little bit more.
It also makes me reflect on the voices that need to be here the most that are not afforded the opportunity to. And as my late mother used to tell me, when you go out and experience and you be in new places, to see things through her eyes, carry the stories home. So we want to invite all of you to take these messages that we have during our time together back to your communities, for those like Johnny O who don't have the opportunity to be here today. So Aunt and I work at the Center for Native American Youth, and we work every day to cultivate a space of belonging and empowerment for Native youth. We launched a survey, the largest survey conducted by Indigenous people for Indigenous people, called the Indigenous Future Survey, that a majority of Native people told us that they experienced discrimination, and over 90% of Native people do not believe that the average American cares about their experience. Native youth face this every day, from erasure in school curriculum to being reduced to mere caricatures and race-based mascots, causing some of the highest rates of depression, ideation, suicide, and subhumanization. But the reality is that we are so much more. We are thriving in beautiful cultures and beautiful people. We were talking just last night over dinner. We are your neighbors. We are your judges. We are your elected officials. We are executives in predominantly white institutions, and we are secretaries in the highest department of the Department of the Interior. So we are so much more than what society and institutions have labeled us to be.
And I just want to recognize this is my first time at the festival, so I'm very excited. We've gotten off to like a really great start. Is anyone else's first time here? Okay, all right, so we're all first timers. Congratulations. I know I've had some fun. But this morning, I thought it was a really great opening, right? Because we got to hear about the experience of Blackness here in Brazil. And it made me think about how the experience of a Black person here in Brazil is not that different from the experience of a Black person in the United States. I'll share, yesterday, me and Nikki, we had went shopping, and we were driving back, and we got stopped by a police officer. We got pulled out of the car and we got frisked. And I was like, I had told my aunties back at home, and I just remember thinking like, oh man, you can't be Black anywhere, like anywhere in the world. And for me, I'm thankful that I get to experience all of this with you all, because it really is eye-opening, right? I feel like coming from a country we're often in a bubble, and we think that our experiences are, just that in our own communities, but really they're global. And so being here, again, I am thankful. But I wanted to share that the Native diaspora, right, kind of started with the onset of the colonization of Americas, right? So being forced on long walks, being forced onto reservations, and even today with over 50% of the Native population living in urban areas like the city of Chicago, like the city of LA, like the city of New York. And so I just want to recognize today that we have the opportunity to collectively learn and to be challenged and to grow and become better relatives to each other in the movement that we're creating.
All of that to be said, we have this collective call in for all of us, as Cordell had talked about this morning, and a collective call for humanity. We are asking to have Indigenous people ingrained in the fabric of all spaces. Anthony just came from a conversation on the importance of DEI. But the reality is we are worth more than just being on a DEI committee as Native people. We are worth more than just a mere land acknowledgement or a Indigenous panel, or worth more than giving a microphone to a Native person during the month of November of Native American Heritage Month, and then forgetting about us the rest of the time. We had talked just last night over dinner about the need to collectively strengthen a fabric. But when you have side conversations, when you only have a land acknowledgement, when you only recognize us during Native American Heritage Month, that's not strengthening fabric, that's just adding patches on the end. And so we want to call all of us in to collectively commit to doing that work together. Cordell said just this morning that this is a space to remove our avatars. And we've all been in spaces where we've had to entertain, where we've had to dance, or we've had to jump incredibly high for others. And as a person who's often the only Native in the room, I'm tired of dancing. I'm so tired of not being able to take off my armor for fear of having arrows to be thrown at me. And so I want to also remind us to not be losing sight of those people at times where we do have to dance or times that we do entertain. We are still human, and please to look at us as more than entertaining caricatures, dancers, things like that. But we are at a moment in our world, and I'm saying this because we're at this time in our world where as soon as we turn on the media, as soon as we go onto social media, we see so much hurt and harm within our communities and within our peers that we can't afford lateral violence against each other, whether it's attended or not. And we need to dig deep, because when we dig deep and have these uncomfortable conversations, that's when the real solidarity work starts. And when we do that, we take away the tokenism and we bring in the humanity.
Thank you, Nikki. It really made me think about, I want to share a quick story with you all. In the city of Chicago, we were one of the cities in the United States that were able to successfully take down our Columbus statues. And so we had a, thank you. And how we were able to do that was through Black Indigenous solidarity, right? Our two communities coming together for a common cause and telling our elected officials and our city that this man does not represent us or our values as a community, he needs to go. And so that was the first time in my life and my auntie's life that the Black community in the city of Chicago and the Native community in the city of Chicago had worked together and successfully implemented one of their goals or got what they were asking for, right? But at the time it made me think, like, our communities are very similar. The Black experience and the Native experience are one and the same, right? We may come from different communities, but we face the same type of discrimination. We face the same type of harm from our government and our police forces. And so why isn't it that we aren't working together more often? And so all that to say, that was one of the first times that I had felt like belonging in my own community, right? Because I think of the anti-Blackness that is inherent in the Native community, and the anti-Nativeness that is in the Black community as well. And it was one of the very first times that I've seen both sides of me, right? I'm a whole person, Black and Native. Those communities come together and work for a common cause and a common good. And to this day, right, we've cultivated those relationships where, we will show up for the Black community when it comes to a police shooting in the city of Chicago or one of their schools are being shut down. And the Black community shows up for the Native community when, like Nikki said, we are often put on stage for performative reasons, or we don't have the representation that we deserve within the city of Chicago. And so my hope is that solidarity, that Black and Indigenous solidarity can happen across the globe. We see that Blackness here in Brazil is heavily ingrained in the culture, like it is in the United States, right? Like I said, our countries are not so different. And my hope is that that solidarity goes beyond just Black and Native communities, goes into Latin communities, and goes into other communities of colors as well, because everyone deserves to have that feeling of belonging and that feeling of comfortableness in their own home or where they may be residing at currently.
I love that. That's so beautiful and a story. And it made me think about living in Washington, D.C. We have members in the United States Congress, Sharice David, Mary Peltola. We have Secretary of Interior Holland. And I'll never forget my first time walking into then United States Congresswoman Deb Haaland's office and seeing artwork that is reflective of her Pueblo culture, and her saying, "Do you want to just sit and hang out in here for a while?" But then reminding us that not only do we belong in spaces such as United States Congress, but our people have always been engaging at some form of democracy level, pre-European colonial contact. Whether we had societies, whether we had clanships, we were even, the Iroquois Confederacy was a model for the United States Constitution. And so our democracy is very much rooted in indigenous values, and there are so many things to be said about our society that we live in today and the amount of power that Native people and influence that Native people have had over it. I think a moment where I really felt a strong sense of belonging is Sharice Davids, a representative from Kansas, reached out to all of us young Native professionals to watch Mary Peltola get sworn in as the first Native Alaskan into Congress. And we all showed up in our ribbon skirts, our beaded medallions, our big earrings, because we were just so proud and to watch her get sworn in and to see her peers, a sea of non-Native, and we know how Congress is, predominantly white old men, giving her a standing ovation, telling her welcome into this space was like a really beautiful moment that I know I felt belonging. And I was like, if somebody like her can make it, I can make it anywhere. And so the work that we do at CNE, it's very much to empower young people. And we had received feedback that we are healing their inner child. But the work that we are doing, Anthony, I feel like is also healing work for ourselves. It's healing work for the next generation so they have it easier than we do. But it's also healing collectively our ancestors that possibly never had the opportunity to heal because they were doing the best that they could for the future of us. And I want to open this up for a conversation. I just heard that we've got like another half hour, which I don't think we were prepared to because we were running so far behind. We just wanted to get a move on this. But our call to action today and our messaging behind this is really simple, that we want you to see us. When you see us as more than our race, more than entertainment, more than something that you want to post on your Instagram because our outfits are really cool, then you're playing a crucial role in disrupting systems that we have been born into and that we all seek to rebuild together. As Maria had called us this morning to be disruptive change makers, to revolutionize the systems and institutions that we navigate and that our children are forced into, and that we need to do it together because we know that we are going to be stronger in this movement together. I also just want to thank Cordell, even though he's not in the room. He's reminded us that we can be in a space together and we can remove our avatar. We can put down our armor and not be in fear of arrows being thrown at our back. And I want to encourage you all that when you leave here, try to find safe spaces where you don't need to show up with your avatar. Being an authentic self is truly an inherent superpower, and I hope that you never lose sight of that.
Well, I just want to thank you for those words, Nikki, and it really made me think about like the work that we're doing at CNA. We just held one of our convenings in Washington, D.C. last week, where we selected 5 champions for change from across the United States, 5 indigenous youth, and they're given a platform for the year for the work that they're doing in their community. And we had the opportunity to meet with Secretary Deb Haaland in the Department of Interior, and it was one of the very first times that I have seen an entire room of people crying. In a very positive way, right? Crying because they were happy. The youth that we had brought all had said that Secretary Deb Haaland was an inspiration to them, and was one of the main reasons why they keep doing the work that they're doing. Right, and then there was me, I was sitting in the back with tears, welting up tears in my eyes, trying not to cry as well. But it really does harp on that importantness of belonging, and we may be those very first people in those spaces, but it opens the door, right, for people to come behind us. And I was in a panel before this, and I talked about one of the things that I had viewed myself as is like a doorstop, right? Something very insignificant that makes our lives very easy, right? When we need to carry in groceries or furniture or whatnot. But for me, being a doorstop is very significant, not insignificant, significant, because it allows people behind me to get in that door, right? And it allows them to have a seat at that table where they're able to make those decisions, and they're able to be with people who look like them and talk like them and have the same feelings as them and the same experiences as them, because those are the people that we, one, need in power in those decision-making positions, but two, to make sure that the world that we're leaving behind for the next 7 generations is better than we left it.
We'd like to turn it to you all to see if you have reflections, questions, things that we can discuss together. Again, we want this to be a space where we can take off our armor, but then also grow in community and become stronger together.
Thank you so much for this panel. I really, really appreciate it. I especially appreciate the points about how intersectional collaboration is so critical. I happen to be obviously Black, and I'm working with an Indigenous leader in New Zealand in order to convene and create a framework for the sharing of Indigenous knowledge and its preservation. And I was wondering, what advice do you have for those of us who might not necessarily be Indigenous ourselves, collaborating with Indigenous communities in order to elevate voice, and what it looks like in order to have that reinforcement across communities within community to be able to have a continuous, sustainable, and safe engagement? How do you operate responsibly across the board?
I really appreciate, and I think that what you're doing is a model. You took it upon yourself to start engaging with Indigenous communities. You did the work, and I think that speaks power. I also believe that when engaging, with Native folks, for it to be reciprocal and make sure that there's a collective understanding of how the Native community will also advance. So when we're talking about liberation, it needs to be a collective perspective. And obviously, in the work that you're doing, it's never extractive. There are so many times when I know that I have felt that maybe I wasn't receiving as much that I was giving a bit too much. And although that may not be the intent, that is the impact. And so as you're going about in this work, make sure that you're doing it from a mindset of a decolonial construct. Too often we are in a space where we are thinking of a colonial systemic mindset. And that is counterintuitive to who we are as Native people and the values that we have. And so as far as engagement, I know when I approach organizations from different lived experiences, from different ethnic backgrounds, I try to align on collective values first. That removes race, removes experiences, but if we can come together from values-based space, I think that instills a strong part of the humanity. Additionally, I do my best to do my research. I do the work. I never show up with the ignorant questions or spaces of just saying, I'm just really uneducated. because I have been receiving that my entire life, and I never want to put someone in that position. So I continue to do the work as well, and I encourage you all, as you're engaging with Native folks, to do the work, come from a space of education, eagerness to learn, and reciprocal benefit for liberation.
I think for me, I'm going to switch hats really quickly here. I am a social work student as well. And one of the things that social work is meant to do is help, social work terms we call them clients, but help people realize that they have their own power and they have their own self-determination. And so that never is coming in and saying, oh, we think you can do A, B, C, or X, Y, Z to make your community better. It's being that bouncing board and saying, and helping that community realize that, hey, these are where your strengths are. These are how these strengths can be played on in your community. But it's allowing them to make those decisions, right? You may know that, oh, I see that you have a strength here, but it's allowing them to come to that realization to themselves, because there's something so powerful about that, right? Being able to decide what happens with our own communities. I particularly look at my elected position in the city of Chicago. We're one of the only cities in the country that has a civilian oversight of our police. And that was because we as citizens came together and said, oh, we need to determine how our communities are policed and what type of policing practices we're putting in place, right? That wasn't the city of Chicago, that wasn't the police department implementing those things upon us. That was us implementing those upon the city of Chicago. And so allowing those indigenous communities to implement their own practices when they come to realize what they are, and giving them I think the main thing is those resources, right? Our communities don't have the resources when it comes to money to be able to implement a lot of the practices that we have. We have that indigenous knowledge system that we've had for thousands of years, but people don't listen to us, right? And people don't view it on the same level as Western knowledge or Western science or things like that.
That also makes me think, Anthony, about the values that we have, and one of the pillars of work that we have at the Center for Native American Youth is to be a good relative. And when I look at our partners as our relatives, we inherently start thinking of them differently. We have different levels of respect and love that we provide when we lead in our work that way. At the Center for Native American Youth, we have a youth advisory board that helps guide our work to ensure that we're youth-led, youth-driven, and constantly mindful of having intergenerational spaces. And by seeing these people not as youth, but as my nieces, my nephews, and granting them the agency, opportunity to travel to Brazil on Anthony's first international trip to make sure that he has spaces like this, that's being a good relative. I want to be a good auntie to Anthony. And I think that's what really good partnership looks like, is really just being a good relative.
I'm Terry Cook from Philadelphia, and I have two questions, both really rooted in my experience in Philadelphia. One is a straightforward question of you, and the other is a little bit more of a painful question. The straightforward one is for my involvement with the local group that is organizing for the 250th anniversary of the country. Philadelphia was the most important part of that. It's clear that it's going to be much more inclusive than back in 1976. Are you aware of anything at the national level that is going to give special recognition to Native Americans in the 2026 celebration?
So we are actually in the centennial of Native Americans being recognized as citizens. So this historic election of 2024 is the 100th year that our people have been given the right to vote. And it actually makes me very emotional, because as we had talked about earlier, our democracy precedes European and colonial contact. And I think about my grandmother, who is the first Native American woman to serve in the United States Marine Corps and fought for our country before the United States even recognized her as a citizen. But that story isn't isolated, because I'm sure many of you have relatives who fought in the war before they were even given citizenship or the right to vote. But it's because we have a love of our people and a love of land that goes beyond what any piece of paper says who we are, how many years it's been. And so when I think about the 100th year, the centennial of our people being recognized, all I can do is reflect that we have so much more progress to make. And that 100, that's just a piece of paper, because our people have been taking care of one another. We've been fighting for our land and for our people for generations. But I do believe there's something to be said that with this 150th anniversary that you were speaking of, it is my hope that there's also space for truth, healing, and reconciliation for Native people in that space.
Thank you. And the more painful question, as a Quaker, I have some involvement with the Lenape people. And there is a wonderful tradition of William Penn, but because of people after, in governments after William Penn, the many people have gotten fragmented, and some have been relocated, some are still in the Philadelphia area. There are some elders who are very much respected up in the Quebec area. But as a result of these outside forces, many people have really lost their identity and are not working with each other. Other than grief, is there a role for someone like me to try to help? That's my question.
Thank you very much for that.
I think looking from
A space of empowerment, recognizing that though they may be displaced, they are still there. So that inherently makes them resilient. To check any biases and privilege that you may have at the door when you're putting in the work. To financially invest in solutions that they decide. To ensure that you are using your personal connections and platforms and privilege that you may have to amplify their voices and their solutions. But to make sure that the community that has been displaced that you're referring to make sure that they are leading in the solutions, and it's your responsibility as an ally to be as supportive as possible and leverage your connections and your privilege as much as possible to advance what they're desiring to see.
Pennsylvania as well. I have a question about intersectionality between indigenous and African diasporic people. We're here in Brazil, so I don't necessarily understand the history of that intersection here. I just love to kind of have a sense of like where it's working, you know, what are the highlights of Black and Indigenous intersectionality, and where we have more work to do, but just kind of be able to learn from your experiences.
Yeah, I I brought up the example of our Black Indigenous Solidarity rally in the city of Chicago and how we were able to get our Columbus statues taken down, right? Because it's someone that doesn't represent our communities or our community's values. And in those conversations, one of the things, right, being from both of those communities, right, being Black, being Native, I kind of get to see both sides of the coin, right? For Native people, I get to see a lot of the anti-Blackness that is within our communities, and how that kind of stops us from working with each other, from being told at a very young age, right, that I should cut my hair because I would pass more, to like staying out of the sun, right, so I wouldn't be as dark as I would. But also recognizing, right, like when it comes to like Black communities, right, there are things that are inherently anti-Native, from wearing mascot gear to just simple terminology, right? I brought up, we talked last night over dinner about the word savage, right? And how it's kind of like, now it's like a term of endearment, like, oh, bro, that was savage, or like, oh, you're savage. Right, that's something that's good. Like, you want someone to say that to you now. But for Native people, like, that was, like, we were called savages, and that was how they took our land. And so I think for me, one of the things is coming to the table and like being open to each other's communities and saying, hey, you know, these are some of the ways that we see that we can work together. These are the hurdles that we have to get over. And it is that openness, right? I think for any communities to work together beyond Black communities, beyond Native communities, is you have to be able and willing to come to the table to hear someone out and to listen to them and their story and their experiences. Because more often than not, we will always find a way to connect, whether it's you live in the same city or you've met the same person or read the same book, right? We'll find those little connections, and we soon start to realize that our experiences and the realities that we are living in aren't so different from each other. But I also think about like showing up for one another, right? And so when I look at movements across the United States, when it came to the No DAPL movement, right, we had Black community members showing up for Native community members, right? Because water rights issues aren't just a Native issue, they're an everyone issue, right? When it came to, you know, George Floyd and the movements that we see in 2020, we see Native people show up as well, right, in kind of like the height of the Black Lives Matter movement, because that, you know, police shootings or killings aren't just, a problem in the Black community, they're a problem everywhere, in all communities of color, right? When it comes to Native communities, when we see missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls, right? We also know that Black women are going missing at an alarming rate, and no one cares, right? And so when our communities are bringing these issues to the forefront, we may be leading in those issues, but we have people behind us who are showing up for us as well. And it allows other people to say, oh, well, you know, this isn't just a Native issue, this is an everyone issue, right? And so I think the main thing that I'm starting to see that is working is that showing up for each other, but also that willingness to kind of relearn what we have been taught, and that willingness of at least starting the conversation.
I love that. I spoke with an organization that is just starting out called Black Liberation Indigenous Sovereignty, that is
Rooted in the collective experience of Black and Indigenous people. And I think it was like 5 or 6 big buses
that drove from the Pine Ridge Reservation down to Cop City to stand in solidarity with the Black community in Atlanta, fighting the high rates of incarcerated people for the Black community.
Or as Anthony talked about,
The Black community showing up on the Standing Rock Sioux Reservation because they know how important and integral water is to our community. Even Anthony's story of Black and Indigenous people coming in the city of Chicago to collectively throw down the Columbus statue. That's such a beautiful story. There's so much more space, and I'm always drawn to Dr. King's quote of injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere. And I firmly believe that when we build power, that we are stronger together. The Black struggle is my struggle, and the Indigenous struggle is a Black struggle. And so how can we make sure that we are creating spaces where we can fight for solutions together for a collective liberation?
I've heard the saying, I saw the future and we won. What does that future look like for you?
I'm a big dreamer, right? So I always love to dream about the future and to dream about like what my life would look like or what my community's life would look like. I think for me, it's like what I had to go through in school as a young Black and Indigenous person is that someone who else has that same experience, that life experience as me, doesn't have to, being Black and Native, doesn't have to go through what I had to go through. And that their life is easier, right? Right, we constantly are having to fight for every little thing in our lives, from being treated like a human to having access to, affordable health care, to having access to a clean environment, and it's exhausting. And so in my future, where we have won is, we're all sitting back and we're relaxing and without a care in the world. I think it'll take a very long time to get there, but that's why I talk a lot about like the next 7 generations, right? Because what we're doing today may not affect us in the immediate, but what has been taught to me from my aunties and elders from my community is that what we're doing today, we're not doing it for ourselves, we're doing it for those next 7 generations, right? We want to leave the world that we are in better than what it is now. And so I think in a future where we won, we see our communities thriving, we see a community where, right, we can all go out and sit on the beach with our feet up and just relax. I think it's something that is emotional for me, right? Because I know that it's something that I'm never going to see in my lifetime. And I know it's something that my children or maybe their children are never going to see. And it sucks, right? It sucks that we're never going to see that. We're never going to get to experience that. But I also am like really happy that, 5 or 6 generations from now, that they won't have to do that. And I'll be one of those ancestors that are like cheering them on in the sky, like, we did it, guys, like, congratulations. Yeah, I think that's what a future would mean for me.
When I think about we won, I think about the restoration of our cultural practices, our traditional societies, and most importantly, our languages. When our people were forced into federal boarding schools, the methodology was to kill the Indian and save the man. And our generation and Anthony's generation is still healing from that. We've lost so much of our culture. We've lost so much of our language. And we've lost our ties and our connections to our ancestral homelands. And so restoring that hoop, that's winning to me. And I know that we are putting in the work to do that so our future generations don't have to. And it's interesting because when Anthony was describing and what I'm describing, We are not asking for colonial success. We are not asking for high titles, high paying jobs, big ass houses, big cars. We are just asking to be the way that our Creator had originally had our people being. And it might not make sense because we are so caught up in such a fast-paced world that prides itself on how quickly we move, how much we make in a year, that it might not make sense. But he and I are at peace that it does not need to make sense to people who are in that level as well.
So we're all people that's leading our individual work. And I think the vision for all of us is collective mobility. What's the charge and call to action to people in the room who are workers? What do you want us to go out and do when we go back to our communities?
I think, revisiting what Nikki had said, and that was to see us, was to see Native people, right? Not as people who are coming to do a land acknowledgement, not as people who are coming to dance for you, not as people during Native American Heritage Month, but to see us as your neighbors. We are your colleagues, we're your teachers. And I think that's something that I get really caught up on, because a lot of the times, right, and I think this could be the story for many Native people, is we all have that one person that we've gone up to, introduced ourselves, and they've came up and they said, "Oh, you're the first Native American I've ever met." And I know that's a dang lie, because you probably have a Native neighbor or a Native student in your classroom. You just didn't care to look out for them or to see them, right? Because many of us, why do I have to announce myself to you, right? When we are in a community, and we should know our community members, and we should see them, and seeing them also comes with hearing them and listening to them as well.
I think what I would love for people to walk away with, and it's something I know I need to check at times too, we need to stop programming ourselves. What are you? Where are you from? And start seeing us as relatives. And as Anthony said, we are so tired of being looked at as only Indigenous, because then that puts a label on me. I'm so much more than just being Native. I'm a super badass mom. I'm the youngest executive at the Aspen Institute. I'm an inaugural cohort of an Obama program. But when I'm looked at as only a Native person, it can be tokenizing and isolating. And so it would be my call to let's try not to just remove our avatars, but let's try to remove that programming that all of us have. That would be my thing, because that's when the real work can start, and that collective action that we all want to see together, we can get moving on.
It really makes me think about, I get so embarrassed when I have to be I'm the only Native elected official in my state. I'm the youngest Native American elected nationally, right? And those are really good things, right? But I've learned that I have to say those things for people to validate me, right? When they should validate me because not because I'm Native or the youngest Native, but they should validate me because I care how my community is being policed. And that's not just Native people, right? I have a whole constituency of people that I have to care about. And it sucks, right? To have to be oh, I'm this, I hold this title, I, am the youngest whatever, I'm the first whatever, for people to care, when they should care because you're doing the work, and you're putting your emotional and physical labor into that work. You saying that kind of sparks my,
I was also thinking, you know, when we're talking about this collective movement for each other, what can we be doing together? What can we be doing for your communities to become better allies for your communities? So as I was saying earlier, like, let's make it a reciprocal, mutually beneficial, advancing both of our causes relationship. But I think our time's coming to an end, and I just want to thank you all for being in the Unity.